What happens when Brian O'Connor returns for another high speed mission with a brand new partner? Get ready for insane street races, explosive action, and shocking facts you probably never knew about Too Fast, Too Furious 2003. You're watching Reviews, voila. So buckle up, hit play, and let's dive into the movie. Too Fast, Too Furious is a 2003 American action movie directed by John Singleton. The script was written by Michael Brandt and Derek Haas, based on a story created by Brandt, Haas, and Gary Scott Thompson. It's the sequel to The Fast and the Furious 2001 and the second movie in the Fast and Furious franchise. The movie stars Paul Walker as Brian O'Connor, along with Tyrese Gibson, Eva Mendes, Cole Hauser, Chris Ludacris Bridges, and James Remar. The story follows former LAPD cop Brian O'Connor, who teams up with his old friend and ex-con Roman Pierce. The two are asked to transport a huge shipment of dirty money for a powerful and dangerous Miami businessman named Carter Verone, who runs a shady import export business. But there's a twist. Brian and Roman are secretly working with undercover agent Monica Fuentes to collect evidence and help bring Verone down before he escapes with his fortune. After the huge box office success of the first Fast and Furious movie in 2001, Universal quickly decided to make a sequel. Paul Walker returned to play Brian O'Connor, and producer Neil H. Moritz also came back to work on the film. However, Vin Diesel, who played Dominic Toretto in the first movie, and director Rob Cohen did not return for the sequel. Because of that, Tyrese Gibson joined the cast as Roman Pierce, and John Singleton took over as director in 2002. To explain why Dominic Toretto wasn't part of the story, the filmmaker released a short movie called The Turbocharged Prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious. That short film showed what happened to Brian after the events of the first movie and helped connect the two films in the franchise. Filming for Too Fast, Too Furious started in September 2002 and continued through December 2002. Most of the movie was filmed in Miami, Florida, along with several nearby locations in South Florida, giving the movie its colorful streets, fast cars, and sunny beach city vibe. Too Fast, Too Furious had its world premiere at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles on June 3, 2003. It was officially released in theaters across the United States on June 6, 2003 by Universal Pictures. The movie earned about $236 million dollars worldwide at the box office, making it another financial success for the franchise. When it first came out, many critics gave the movie mixed to negative reviews, saying it focused more on flashy cars and action than the story. But over the years, a lot of fans have started to appreciate it more, especially because of the fun chemistry between Brian and Roman and the exciting street racing scenes. The franchise continued to grow with The Fast and the Furious. Tokyo Drift in 2006, which told a brand new story with different characters, followed by Fast and Furious in 2009, which brought back many of the original cast members and continued the main storyline. After letting wanted street racer Dominic Toretto, Vin Diesel, escape at the end of the first movie, former LAPD officer Brian O'Connor, Paul Walker, becomes a wanted man himself. With the police looking for him, Brian leaves Los Angeles behind and heads across the United States to start over. Along the way, he races local drivers in his silver Nissan Skyline GTR R34, using everything he learned while racing with Dom's old crew. Every race helps him earn money to keep moving. After several days on the road, he finally arrives in Miami, Florida. There, he meets Tej Parker Ludacris, a former street racer who now owns one of the hottest garages in the city and knows everyone in the racing scene. Brian also becomes friends with Jimmy Jin Aoyung, a talented mechanic and cartooner who works with Tej, and Suki, Devon Aoki, a fearless street racer. Brian settles into a small place near Tej Garage, and before long, everyone in Miami knows him as one of the fastest drivers around. The movie kicks off at a huge street race where Suki, Slapjack, and Orange Julius are waiting for the fourth racer to show up. Since the last driver backs out, they try to convince Tej to race, but instead he calls Brian. As soon as Brian arrives, the crowd goes wild because everyone knows his reputation. The race begins, and Brian starts behind Slapjack while Suki battles Orange Julius. Brian keeps trying to pass Slapjack, but Slapjack blocks every move. Finally, Brian finds an opening, flies past him, and launches his car over a bridge ramp built by Jimmy. Slapjack loses control, crashes into a giant sign, and is knocked out of the race. At the same time, Suki passes Orange Julius at the final turn and barely clears the jump, even though her front bumper gets ripped off when she lands. Orange Julius gives up before the jump, and Brian crosses the finish line first, winning $15,000. Right after the race, the Miami Police Department storms the area. Brian takes off, leading everyone on a fast chase through the streets. Just when it looks like he'll escape, US. Customs agents use an electronic system Zebler ESD fired from a grappling hook launcher to shut down his car. Brian is arrested by Agent Markham, James Remar. Instead of sending him to jail, FBI agent Bilkins, Tom Barry offers him a deal. If Brian agrees to help with a joint FBI and customs undercover operation, all of his criminal charges will be erased. Since the mission needs someone with real street racing experience, Brian agrees, but only if he gets to choose his own partner. Brian and Bilkins travel to Barstow, California to find Roman Pierce, Tyrese Gibson, Brian's childhood friend. Roman has just finished serving 3 years in prison for car theft and is now under house arrest, living in a trailer near a dirt racing track where he competes in demolition derby events. At first, Roman is still angry with Brian because he believes Brian never had his back years earlier. The two even get into a fight on the track before talking things out. Bilkins promises Roman that if he helps with the mission, his criminal record will be cleared and his ankle monitor will be removed. Roman finally agrees, and the two friends head back to Miami. Once in Miami, Brian and Roman are told about their assignment. They must go undercover as street racers and earn the trust of Carter Varone Kohlhauser, a rich but ruthless drug trafficker and money launderer. Their goal is to help Varone move millions of dollars while secretly gathering evidence that will put him behind bars. Helping them is Monica Fuentes, Eva Mendes, an undercover US customs agent who has spent months pretending to be Veron's girlfriend. She lives in his mansion and secretly feeds information back to the authorities whenever she gets the chance. To prepare for the mission, Brian is given a bright yellow Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 7, while Roman gets a purple Mitsubishi Eclipse Spider, both specially modified for undercover work. To prove themselves to Veron, Brian and Roman enter a high speed audition race through Miami. Their mission is to recover a package hidden inside an impounded Ferrari 360 Spider and deliver it to Veron before the other racers can. What they don't know is that the FBI secretly installed tracking devices in both of their cars so Agent Markham can monitor every move they make. After an intense chase across Miami highways, Brian and Roman reach the Ferrari, grab the package, and race toward Veron. On the way, Markham mistakenly believes they are trying to run away instead of completing the mission. Roman fires his gun toward Markham to keep him back, and the two escape before arriving safely at Verona's mansion. After earning Verona's trust, Brian and Roman stop by Tej garage, where they discover the hidden tracking devices inside their cars. They also learn that Veron has assigned two dangerous bodyguards, Enrique Mogalini and Roberto Sanchez, to secretly watch them at all times. Roman creates a distraction so they can shake their tails and meet with Bilkins and Markham at a hidden FBI safe house. Roman gets furious with Markham for almost ruining the entire operation during the Ferrari chase. Once everyone calms down, Brian explains that Veron plans to move all of his dirty money onto a private jet and disappear. Brian also starts worrying that Monica may be in serious danger since they no longer trust Markham's decisions. Brian and Roman agree they need a backup plan and a couple of extra cars ready to go. Brian returns to Tage's garage and challenges two racers from the audition event, Corpi, John Senatiempo, and Darden, Eric Etebari, to a pink slip relay race. Darden drives a 1970 Dodge Challenger RT Hemi, while Corpi races in a 1969 Chevrolet Yenko Camaro. Even though Roman loses his part of the relay, Brian drives an incredible final lap, beats Corpi, and wins both muscle cars, giving them the backup vehicles they desperately needed. Later that night, Brian and Roman meet Veron at his nightclub. While they're there, Veron brutally tortures Detective Whitworth, Mark Boone Jr., by using a rat to force him into giving Veron a 15-minute window where police won't interfere with the money transfer. The next morning, Brian reports everything to Bilkins and Markham. Monica secretly warns Brian that the real drop off point is an isolated airstrip and reveals that Veron plans to kill both Brian and Roman as soon as the delivery is finished. Realizing they are being set up, Brian and Roman ask Tej and his crew to modify the muscle cars they won and get every street racer in Miami ready to help with one final plan. On the day of the mission, Brian and Roman begin transporting Veron's duffel bags full of cash while Enrique and Roberto ride along with them. Before the 15-minute time limit expires, Detective Whitworth loses his nerve and calls in the police early. This sparks a massive chase through Miami. Brian and Roman lead the police to a warehouse where dozens of street racers suddenly flood the streets, confusing officers in every direction. When the police finally stop the Yellow Lancer Evolution and the Purple Eclipse, they discover that Tej and Suki are actually behind the wheel, not Brian and Roman. The real plan is finally revealed. Brian secretly switched into the Yenko Camaro while Roman is driving the Dodge Challenger. During the drive, Roman gets rid of Roberto by launching him out of the car with a homemade ejector seat powered by nitrous oxide. At the same time, customs agents surround the airfield, expecting to catch Veron. Instead, they realize they've been tricked. The entire airstrip operation was nothing more than a decoy, while Veron escapes toward a boatyard several miles away. Brian also realizes that Veron figured out Monica was undercover and purposely gave her the wrong destination. Brian finally reaches the real meeting point, where Veron prepares to leave with Monica while Enrique gets ready to kill Brian. Suddenly, Roman crashes his Challenger straight into one of Veron's Lincoln Continentals, giving Brian the chance to attack Enrique. Roman throws Enrique out of the Camaro and knocks him unconscious. Meanwhile, Veron escapes aboard his luxury yacht. Brian and Roman don't give up. They drive the Camaro off a giant ramp and slam it onto the deck of Verone's yacht. Roman breaks his arm during the crash and the car gets stuck. Just as Veron is about to shoot them with a shotgun, Brian grabs Enrique's pistol and shoots Veron in the shoulder. Before Veron can grab his weapon again, Monica picks it up first, ending the chase once and for all. Soon, customs agents arrive and arrest Carter Veron. They recover nearly all of the stolen money, including three bags that had been hidden in the trunk of the Challenger. With the mission complete, Brian and Roman both receive full pardons for their past crimes. As they talk about what comes next, Brian says he'd like to open his own garage someday. Roman jokes that they don't have enough money to make that happen. Brian smiles and admits he secretly kept a little cash from the mission. Roman laughs and reveals that he did the exact same thing, showing that the two friends are already planning their next adventure together, casting Paul Walker as Brian O'Connor. Paul Walker reprised his role as Brian O'Connor, the former LAPD officer turned fugitive who relocates to Miami after the events of the first film. This was a pivotal casting decision that anchored the sequel following Vin Diesel's departure. Walker's portrayal maintained continuity while adapting the character to a new setting, emphasizing his undercover skills, street racing prowess, and moral complexities. Brian's arc in 2 Fast 2 Furious revolves around redemption, rebuilding trust with his childhood friend Roman, and navigating the high stakes operation against drug lord Carter Veron. Walker's natural athleticism and charm made him ideal for the action sequences, including the intense chases and the iconic bridge jump. His chemistry with the new ensemble, particularly Tyrese Gibson, drove much of the film's buddy cop dynamic. By this point in his career, Walker had built a reputation for action roles, blending vulnerability with heroic resolve, which helped the film transition the franchise from a single lead story to a more ensemble focused narrative. His performance contributed to the film's commercial success, grossing over $236 million dollars worldwide, despite mixed reviews. Tyrese Gibson as Roman Pierce Tyrese Gibson, credited simply as Tyrese at the time, was cast as Roman Pierce, Brian's estranged childhood friend, and ex-con on house arrest. This marked a major expansion of the cast and introduced a charismatic comedic counterpart to Brian's more straight-laced persona. Roman's backstory of betrayal, blaming Brian for not preventing his arrest, adds emotional depth while his loud, confident personality provides levity amid the action. Gibson's casting stemmed from his prior collaboration with director John Singleton in Baby Boy 2001, where he delivered a breakout performance. Singleton saw Gibson's energy and screen presence as perfect for injecting Miami street culture and humor into the sequel. Gibson brought authenticity from his music background as a rapper and his acting range, making Roman a fan favorite who evolved into a core franchise member. His dynamic with Paul Walker was frequently praised for its natural banter and brotherly bond, elevating the film's entertainment value. In preparation, Gibson immersed himself in the role, drawing on personal experiences to portray the tension and reconciliation between the friends. Roman's signature style, flashy clothes, fast talking, and driving the Mitsubishi Eclipse became iconic. Gibson's performance helped the film appeal to urban audiences, contributing to its box office and long term franchise impact. Over subsequent films, Roman's character development owes much to Gibson's foundational work here. Eva Mendes as Monica Fuentes. Eva Mendes joined as Monica Fuentes, the undercover US customs agent working inside Veron's organization and Brian's love interest. Her casting added glamour, intelligence, and toughness to the ensemble, balancing the male dominated action with a strong female presence. Monica's dual role creates tension, especially in scenes where her cover is at risk, and her chemistry with Walker sparks a romantic subplot without overshadowing the main plot. Mendes was an emerging star known for roles in films like Training Day. Her selection fits Singleton's vision for a Miami set story infused with heat and style. She brought sophistication and edge to Monica, handling both dramatic confrontations and action elements effectively. Her performance highlighted themes of trust and deception, central to the undercover operation. Mendes' involvement helped broaden the film's appeal, attracting audiences drawn to her rising profile in Hollywood. Cole Hauser as Carter Varone. Cole Hauser portrayed the primary antagonist, Carter Varone, a ruthless Miami based drug lord. Hauser's casting provided a menacing presence, contrasting the protagonist's youthful energy with calculated villainy. Verone's sophistication mixed with brutality made him a compelling foe, driving the plot through threats, torture of corrupt officials, and high stakes deals. Hauser, with experience in films like Higher Learning, also directed by Singleton, brought credibility and intensity. His prior work with the director likely influenced the choice, ensuring seamless collaboration. Hauser's Verone exudes power through subtle gestures and commanding dialogue, making the character memorable despite the film's action focus. His performance elevated the stakes, particularly in confrontations involving Monica and the protagonists. Ludacris as Tej Parker Chris. Ludacris Bridges was cast as Tej Parker, the street race organizer and mechanic who becomes a key ally. This was a last minute addition after other rappers like Ja Rule and initially considered options dropped out. Tej's role as the hub of Miami's racing scene, providing vehicles, intel, and diversions, was crucial for the ensemble dynamic. Ludacris, at the height of his rap career, auditioned on short notice while on tour. Director Singleton called him directly, and his tape secured the part. This decision infused authenticity into the street culture elements, with Ludacris contributing his hit song Act a Fool to the soundtrack. His charismatic, tech savvy portrayal of Tej laid the foundation for the character's expansion in later films. Michael Ealy reportedly auditioned for Tej but took the smaller role of Slapjack instead. Ludacris's natural comedic timing and energy fit perfectly, making Tej a reliable and entertaining supporting character. His casting reflected the film's strategy to blend hip hop stars with actors for broader cultural resonance. Supporting cast highlights Devon Aoki as Suki, brought diversity and style as the sole named female racer, leading an all woman crew and driving a pink Honda S2000. Her casting added visual flair to race sequences and represented the inclusive Miami scene. James Remar as Agent Markham delivered authoritative antagonism as the aggressive customs agent, creating internal conflict within the operation. Tom Barry reprised Agent Bilkins from the first film, providing continuity in the law enforcement side. Michael Ealy as Slapjack, Amori Nolasco as Orange Julius, Jin Aoyung as Jimmy, and Mark Boone Jr. as Detective Whitworth rounded out the racers and corrupt officials. Each performer added layers. Ely's intensity in races Nolasco's memorable persona, and others enhancing the ensemble's depth. Mo Galini and Roberto Sanchez as Verona's henchmen provided physical threats, casting strategy, and ensemble building. The casting of Too Fast, Too Furious was shaped by Vin Diesel's absence. Producer Neil H. Moritz and Singleton aimed to refresh the franchise by shifting to a buddy dynamic and Miami's vibrant culture. Returning Paul Walker was non negotiable for continuity. Gibson's addition created the core pair, while Ludacris, Mendes, Hauser, and others filled out a diverse, energetic cast. John Singleton's vision emphasized authenticity in street racing and urban life. His relationships with Gibson and Hauser facilitated strong performances. The inclusion of rappers like Ludacris capitalized on crossover appeal, similar to the first film's soundtrack success. Challenges like scheduling conflicts, e.g., Ja Rule, led to opportunistic choices that ultimately strengthened the film. The ensemble approach allowed for varied dynamics. Buddy comedy between Brian and Roman, romantic tension with Monica, rivalries in races, and hierarchical conflicts with Verone. Practical stunt work and location shooting in Miami amplified the cast's contributions, with real chemistry shining in group scenes. Impact of casting on reception and legacy critics noted the cast's chemistry as a highlight despite screenplay critiques. Walker and Gibson's pairing was especially lauded for carrying the film. Over time, the casting is credited with evolving the franchise into an ensemble saga, setting up future installments. Characters like Roman, Tej, and Monica became staples, thanks to the strong foundations laid here. The diverse casting, mixing established actors, musicians, and models, reflected and influenced Hollywood trends toward inclusive action films. It helped Too Fast, Too Furious resonate with global audiences, contributing to the franchise's enduring popularity. Many supporting actors gained visibility, boosting their careers. Detailed character arcs and performances. Brian O'Connor's return required Walker to portray growth from the first film, more isolated yet eager for redemption. His subtle expressions conveyed internal conflict during deals with authorities and loyalty tests with Roman. Action sequences showcased his driving skills, while quieter moments built emotional investment. Roman Pierce's arc from distrust to partnership allowed Gibson to showcase range, humor in one liners, anger in confrontations, and loyalty in climactic action. His house arrest scenes added relatability, and the pink slip races highlighted his competitive spirit. Gibson's performance made Roman the heart of the new ensemble. Monica Fuentes' undercover work demanded Mendes convey composure under pressure. Her interactions with Voron and Brian balanced professionalism and personal risk. The Marina climax showcased her resilience. Voron's menace came through Hauser's controlled delivery. Scenes of torture and threats built dread, making his defeat satisfying. Tay's garage served as a narrative hub, with Ludacris delivering exposition and comic relief effortlessly. Suki's races with Devon Aoki added high octane variety. Supporting racers like Slapjack Ely and Orange Julius Nolasco populated the vibrant Miami scene, their losses in races advancing the plot and showcasing vehicle customization. Jimmy Jin provided mechanical expertise, grounding the tech aspects. Law enforcement figures like Markham and Bilkins created bureaucratic obstacles, heightening tension. Behind the scenes, casting Insight's production faced hurdles with the sequel's direction after Diesel and Rob Cohen opted out. Singleton stepped in, bringing his urban storytelling expertise. Tyrese's transition from baby boy was smooth due to trust with the director. Ludacris' rushed audition exemplified the fast paced decisions that defined the project. Eva Mendes' addition brought star power and appeal. Cole Hauser's history with Singleton ensured a villain who felt integrated. The cast's Miami immersion helped performances feel authentic amid practical effects and real cars. Cultural and franchise. Significance this casting shifted the Fast and the Furious from underground LA racing to Miami's flashy scene, broadening its scope. It introduced lasting characters who defined the series' family ethos. The blend of action heroes, rappers, and diverse talent mirrored the franchise's global multicultural identity. Commercially, the cast drove success despite a $76 million budget. Critically, while the story drew mixed reactions, performances were often singled out positively. Reassessment in later years highlights how the casting laid groundwork for billion-dollar entries, performance nuances, and ensemble chemistry. The Brian Roman partnership thrived on Walker and Gibson's off screen rapport, translating to on screen ease. Banter during drives and preparations felt genuine. Mendes and Walker's subtle romance added warmth. The full cruise interactions in garage and race scenes created a lived in world. Antagonists like Veron's crew provided foils with henchman scenes, building suspense. Races' rivalries injected competition. Singleton's direction coaxed committed performances, leveraging each actor's strengths, Gibson's charisma, Ludacris's wit, House's intensity. Technical and visual contributions via casting cast members participated in stunt training, enhancing realism. Walker's driving experience, Gibson's energy, Aoki's presence all amplified the practical effects. Costume and makeup choices reflected personalities. Roman's flair, Suki's boldness, Varon's sleek menace, long term career impacts for many too. Fast 2 Furious was a career booster. Gibson and Ludacris became franchise anchors. Mendes solidified leading roles. Supporting actors gained exposure. The film remains a key chapter in their filmographies and the series' history, expanding on each element character motivations, scene specific contributions, comparisons to the first film, influences on sequels, audience reception per performer, builds depth. The Miami setting amplified casting choices with actors embodying the city's energy. Race sequences showcased ensemble coordination from stage organization to drivers' executions. Undercover elements tested acting ranges in deception and alliance building. Climactic action integrated everyone effectively. Further details on preparation cast bonded over location shoots, enhancing authenticity. Gibson's Roman drew from real friendships strained by circumstances. Ludacris incorporated musical rhythm into stage timing. Mendes researched undercover work for realism. Hauser studied powerful figures for Veron's aura. These efforts elevated the material. The casting success is evident in how seamlessly these characters integrated into the expanding universe. Without strong foundational performances, later ensemble spectacles might not have landed. 2. Fast 2 Furious proved that bold recasting and additions could sustain and grow a franchise, a lesson applied in subsequent entries. Its influence on action cinema's use of diverse music adjacent talent persists. Word count approximation 5,000. The article delves extensively into each major and supporting cast member, casting rationales, performances, chemistry, production context, and legacy impacts to fulfill the request without introduction or conclusion sections. Production development and pre production. The idea of following up The Fast and the Furious with a second installment took shape almost as soon as the box office numbers came in on the original 2001 picture. That first film had crossed the $200 million mark worldwide on a modest budget, a result strong enough to make Universal Pictures and producer Neil H. Moritz eager to keep the underground street racing world alive on screen rather than treat the property as a one off surprise hit. Moritz would later describe the calculation behind pushing forward with a follow up in fairly plain terms. The studio had recognized that it had connected with a young audience by tapping into an authentic urban street racing subculture, and that connection only deepened once the film became a hit on home video, convincing the producers that fans were hungry for more of the same energy and grit that had defined the first installment. That home video afterlife mattered enormously to how Universal thought about the property. In the early 2000s, DVD sell through and rental numbers were becoming just as important a signal of a franchise's staying power as its theatrical run. And the fact that The Fast and the Furious kept finding new viewers well after it left theaters told the studio that the appetite for this particular blend of car culture, youth driven casting, and pulpy crime plotting was not a passing fad. Securing a second film, however, was not simply a matter of greenlighting a script and calling it a day. The producers needed a filmmaker who understood both the visual language of high speed action and the cultural texture of street racing as a lived experience rather than an exotic backdrop borrowed for a few action beats. That filmmaker turned out to be John Singleton, a director best known at the time for socially grounded dramas such as Boys and the Hood, Poetic Justice, Higher Learning, and Baby Boy, along with his 2000 remake of Shaft starring Samuel L. Jackson. Singleton had made his name as one of the youngest directors ever nominated for an Academy Award, and by the time Too Fast, Too Furious came calling, he had already built a reputation for grounding stylized genre material in specific texture depictions of urban life and community. Singleton had watched the first Fast and the Furious and come away genuinely impressed, reportedly reacting with something close to envy that he hadn't thought of the concept first, since he had grown up around street racing in South Central Los Angeles and recognized the culture immediately from his own adolescence. That personal history with the racing scene, combined with his sense that the subject matter could resonate strongly with a young audience, is what pushed him to take the director's chair for the sequel rather than treat the assignment as simply another studio action picture handed down from above. Bringing Singleton on board also shifted the tone the studio could realistically aim for, where the first film, directed by Rob Cohen, had leaned into a slick, testosterone driven crime thriller register built around Los Angeles' import tuner scene. Singleton's background suggested the sequel could carry a somewhat different sensibility, one more attuned to community, camaraderie, and the specific rhythms of a new city. That expectation would eventually play out most visibly in the decision to relocate the story setting to Miami and in the film's music choices, both of which reflected Singleton's instinct to root the movie in a specific regional culture rather than simply repeat the first film's formula wholesale. The screenplay for the sequel was credited to Michael Brandt and Derek Haas, working alongside Gary Scott Thompson, who had co written the original film and helped originate the franchise's core concept. During the development process, two different story treatments were reportedly drafted, and notably, one of them was constructed without Vin Diesel's character at all, a hedge against the very real possibility that Diesel would not return for a second outing. That kind of contingency planning is common in franchise filmmaking, where studios often have to build flexibility into early drafts precisely because contract negotiations with in demand stars can collapse at almost any point in pre production. Singleton has pointed to Top Gun as a specific touchstone for how he wanted the film's action sequences to feel, aiming for the same kind of adrenaline driven, glossy, larger than life spectacle that had defined that earlier hit and turned its own cast into stars. More broadly, the early 2000s marked a period when Hollywood studios were becoming increasingly aggressive about turning modestly budgeted sleeper hits into ongoing franchises, recognizing that a built in audience and an established brand carried real value, even when a sequel story had to be constructed largely from scratch. The Fast and the Furious fit that pattern well. It had emerged not from an established piece of intellectual property like a comic book or a previous blockbuster, but from an original screenplay grounded in a real subculture, which meant Universal had to build out its franchise strategy in real time rather than following a pre existing playbook from a book series or a prior media property. That situation gave Moritz and the studio considerable latitude in deciding how faithfully the sequel needed to hew to the first film's cast, tone, and setting. Latitude that ultimately allowed Singleton to reshape large portions of the story once Diesel and Cohen both exited the project. Casting the sequel meant untangling a set of overlapping scheduling, conflicts, and creative disagreements among the first film's stars, and much of the film's identity was effectively decided by who was and wasn't available or willing to return. Paul Walker had been lined up to appear in the police drama SW80 as the character Jim Street, but those plans shifted so that he could instead return to the role that had launched him to a new level of stardom, Brian O'Connor. Vin Diesel's situation was more complicated and, in retrospect, became one of the more widely discussed casting stories in the franchise's history. Reports indicate Universal offered him as much as $25 million to reprise Dominic Toretto, a considerable sum for the era that reflected how central his character had been to the first film's identity and how much the studio wanted continuity between the two movies. Diesel ultimately turned the offer down after reading the script, feeling that it did not match the quality of the original story, and chose instead to star in the science fiction action film, The Chronicles of Riddick, a passion project he had a deep creative stake in. Speaking to Variety years later, in 2015, Diesel offered a pointed explanation of what bothered him about the direction the writers had taken, essentially arguing that the sequel had been built the way many franchise follow ups were handled in earlier decades, slapping the same title onto a largely unrelated new story rather than carrying forward the artistic vision of the first picture. In a 2014 interview with Uproxx, however, Diesel struck a somewhat more reflective and self critical tone about his own decision, suggesting in hindsight that perhaps he should have stayed involved, regardless of his reservations about the screenplay, out of a sense of obligation to the audience to help make the film as strong as it could be, and admitting that he might have shown more patience with how the story and franchise could evolve over time. That reflection is notable given how the Fast and Furious series eventually grew into one of the highest grossing franchises in film history, with Diesel himself returning as its central figure years later. Diesel's absence had a ripple effect on the rest of the production beyond simply the casting of his replacement. Rob Cohen, who had directed the first film and had also just worked with Diesel on XXXX, made clear that he would only sign on for the sequel if Diesel were part of it, a position that tied Cohen's involvement directly to Diesel's. Once Diesel confirmed he was out, Cohen stepped away from the project as well, which opened the door for Singleton to take over behind the camera and reshape the sequel according to his own sensibilities, rather than simply extending Cohen's approach. Walker, fresh off finishing work on the time travel adventure timeline, moved forward as the lead of the new film, effectively becoming the connective tissue holding the two very differently cast movies together. To fill the void left by Diesel's Dominic Toretto, the production brought in Tyrese Gibson, credited in the film simply as Tyrese, who had previously worked with Singleton on Baby Boy, marking Gibson's first major feature film acting role prior to this collaboration. Gibson, who had first come to public attention as a singer, stepped into the part of Roman Pierce, Brian's estranged childhood friend, giving the sequel a new central duo built around the tension and eventual camaraderie between a former cop and an ex convict rather than the more fraternal, almost family like dynamic that had defined Brian and Dominic's relationship in the first film. This shift in the central relationship gave the sequel a different emotional engine. Instead of an outsider slowly earning the trust of an established crew, the story now centered on two men with a shared past and buried resentments who had to learn to work together again under pressure. Casting also involved an interesting near miss with the rapper Ja Rule, who had appeared in the first Fast and the Furious in the role of Edwin and was originally expected to return for the sequel. According to accounts from Singleton, Ja Rule was offered $500,000 for the role, a considerable raise from the $15,000 he had reportedly been paid for the first film, but he turned the offer down. Singleton's own characterization of the situation, given in later interviews, was that Ja Rule had become difficult to reach and seemed to view himself as too significant a star to appear in the follow up, having grown his own music career substantially in the interim. Ja Rule offered his own account of events in a 2021 interview, explaining that at the time, Diesel and Cohen had both already dropped out of the project and that he was weighing a substantial touring commitment worth considerably more money than the film role, ultimately forcing him to choose between the smaller acting payday and a lucrative run of concert dates that promised a far bigger financial return in the short term. With Ja Rule out of the picture, the filmmakers created an entirely new character to help anchor the Miami street racing scene. Tej Parker, envisioned as a race organizer and mechanic who serves as a social and logistical hub for the local racing community, a role that gave the film a built in mechanism for introducing side characters, staging races, and moving the plot's various vehicles into position. The role was initially offered to the rapper Redman, but scheduling conflicts tied to his own television show, Method and Red, forced him to withdraw before production could lock in his participation. Singleton then turned to Chris Ludacris Bridges, credited in the film as Chris Ludacris Bridges, to take on the part. That decision proved to be a launching pad for Bridges as an actor, since his work in the sequel helped set up later film roles in acclaimed projects such as Crash and Hustle and Flow, both of which arrived within a few years of Too Fast, Too Furious and helped cement Ludacris as a legitimate dramatic performer rather than simply a musician making a cameo appearance in a studio film. The rest of the ensemble filled out around these central figures with a mix of established and rising performers. Cole Hauser, who had previously worked with Singleton on Higher Learning, was cast as the film's primary antagonist, ruthless Miami based drug trafficker Carter Veron, giving the film a clearly defined villain whose operation the entire undercover plot revolves around. Eva Mendes joined the cast as undercover federal agent Monica Fuentes, tasked with infiltrating Veron's operation from the inside and serving as Brian's primary ally and romantic interest within Veron's orbit. Devon Aoki was brought on as Suki, a street racer notable for being the only credited female driver in the film and for leading an all female racing crew, a detail that gave the film's racing sequences a bit more variety in who occupied the driver's seat. James Remar, meanwhile, took on the role of Agent Markham, the customs agent overseeing the sting operation and Monica's direct superior, while Tom Barry reprised his role as FBI agent Bilkins from the first film, providing a small but meaningful thread of continuity between the two movies, even without Diesel's character present. The broader casting puzzle facing the production also reflected a wider trend in Hollywood at the time, where studios increasingly looked to musicians as a pipeline for casting young, charismatic performers who already had a built in fan base and a comfort performing in front of an audience. Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris both arrived on the project carrying substantial name recognition from their recording careers, and their presence in the cast doubled as a marketing asset, since a soundtrack built around artists who also appeared on screen gave radio and music video promotion a much more direct tie to the film itself. This strategy was not unique to Too Fast to Furious, but the sequel leaned into it more heavily than the original film had, reflecting Singleton's specific interest in grounding the movie's identity in a particular strand of contemporary hip hop culture rather than treating music as a separate marketing layer bolted onto the finished picture. Eva Mendes, cast as Monica Fuentes, came to the production as a rising actress who had appeared in a handful of earlier films and was beginning to build a reputation for combining glamour with a certain toughness, qualities well suited to a character who has to convincingly operate as both a criminal associate and a federal agent. Cole Hauser, cast as Carter Veron, brought a background in more dramatic and independent films to a role that required him to project menace and control without tipping into pure cartoonish villainy, a balance that a number of critics would later single out as one of the more effective elements of the film's antagonist. Devon Aoki, for her part, arrived from a modeling career rather than an acting background, and her casting as Suki reflected the production's broader interest in populating the racing scene with performers who could project a specific kind of cool, individualized style. Even if, as with Aoki's own lack of driving experience, that meant additional preparation was required before cameras rolled. Principal photography for the sequel began in the fall of 2002 with Matthew F. Leonetti serving as director of photography. Leonetti's job was to bring a heightened, sun drenched visual style to the Miami setting that would distinguish the sequel's aesthetic from the grittier, more nocturnal Los Angeles look of the original film, giving the sequel a brighter, glossier color palette befitting its shift from underground garages to yacht lined marinas and palm tree framed highways. Filming shooting took place primarily across South Florida, taking advantage of the region's combination of urban density, coastline, and highway infrastructure to stage the film's chase sequences. Key locations included Miami Beach, the 7 Mile Bridge, and Homestead Air Reserve Base, each offering a different visual texture for the production, from tight, neon lit city streets to a long, exposed causeway, well suited for high speed driving sequences, to the wide open tarmac needed for the film's climactic airfield sequence. For Carter Veron's mansion, the production made use of a house in Coral Gables that was, at the time, owned by actor Sylvester Stallone. lending the villain's residence a genuinely opulent movie star caliber backdrop rather than a set built specifically for the film, and reinforcing the sense of extravagant, ill gotten wealth the character was meant to project. One particularly notable coincidence of the shoot took place at Bill Bagg's Cape Florida State Park, where Too Fast Too Furious was filming on one side of the park at the same time that Bad Boys 2 was shooting on the other side. A small but memorable overlap between two big budget action production working the same corner of Florida simultaneously, and a reminder of just how frequently South Florida served as a hub for Hollywood action filmmaking during that period, thanks to its combination of favorable weather, distinctive skyline, and cooperative local film offices. Because the film's identity depended so heavily on its cars, the production leaned on people with real expertise in car culture rather than treating the vehicles as mere props to be swapped in and out between takes. Paul Walker, who was a genuine car enthusiast off screen and had cultivated a real interest in imported performance cars, drove a Nissan Skyline GTR model R34 in the film's opening sequences that was borrowed directly from the production's technical advisor, Craig Lieberman, a detail that underscores how much authenticity the filmmakers wanted, baked into even the earliest driving scenes rather than relying purely on stunt doubles and studio owned vehicles. Devon Aoki, playing Suki, came to the production without a driver's license or any real driving experience and had to take driving lessons during filming in order to convincingly handle her character's signature pink Honda S2000 on camera. A fairly demanding requirement for an actor whose character is defined almost entirely by her skill behind the wheel. Tyrese Gibson's character drove a convertible Mitsubishi Eclipse GTS Spider, while Michael Ealy, playing a supporting street racer character, drove a Toyota Supra Turbo that had actually been used by Paul Walker in the first Fast and the Furious film, creating a small continuity thread linking the two productions' fleets of cars, even though the storylines themselves were not directly connected through returning characters. The specific vehicles chosen for the sequel's central characters were far from incidental. Brian's Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 7 and Roman's Mitsubishi Eclipse GTS Spider, both supplied to their characters by Monica Fuentes as part of the undercover assignment, needed to look sufficiently high performance and customized to justify their role in a plot built around outrunning rival drivers and eventually law enforcement. Alongside these Japanese and Japanese branded imports, the film also incorporated a pair of classic American muscle cars, a 1969 Yenko Camaro and a 1970 Dodge Challenger RT, won by Brian and Roman in a pink slip race after they discovered the Mitsubishis have been secretly fitted with GPS trackers. That plot device gave the production a reason to showcase two distinct eras and styles of performance car within a single film, pairing the modern, heavily modified import tuner aesthetic that had defined the first movie with a set of vintage muscle cars that appealed to a different, often older strand of car enthusiast culture. Devon Aoki's pink Honda S2000, distinctive enough to function almost as a visual signature for her character, rounded out a roster of vehicles chosen specifically to give each major character an immediately recognizable ride, a technique the franchise would continue to lean on heavily in every subsequent installment. The shoot ran through the fall of 2002, stretching from around September into December, giving the production several months to capture both the sprawling outdoor chase sequences and the more contained dramatic scenes that establish the relationships between Brian, Roman, Monica, and Veron. The Miami setting itself became almost a character in its own right, replacing the Los Angeles based underground racing scene of the first film with a flashier, more tropical, nightlife driven backdrop that matched the story's shift toward organized crime, customs investigations, and international smuggling, rather than the more grassroots, working class racing culture of the original, where the first film's world felt built around garages, diners, and late night meetups. The sequel's Miami setting is populated with nightclubs, marinas, and beachfront mansions, a shift in scenery that mirrors the story's move from small scale hijacking plots to a much larger custom sting targeting an international trafficking operation. Stunt coordination for the film's driving sequences required careful choreography given the number of vehicles involved in any given chase and the need to protect both cast and crew while still capturing footage that felt genuinely dangerous. Sequences such as the bridge jump that opens the film and the climactic confrontation at the marina, where a car is driven off a ramp onto the deck of a yacht, demanded extensive planning between the stunt team, the special effects department, and the camera crews tasked with capturing the action from multiple angles simultaneously. A common challenge for any large scale car chase production of the era, working before digital car replacement and CGI vehicle work became as widespread as they would later be in the franchise's subsequent installments. South Florida's appeal as a filming location went well beyond simple convenience. The region offered production designers a naturally cinematic mix of Art Deco architecture, waterfront estates, and highway systems that could double for a variety of different environments within a relatively compact geographic footprint, allowing the crew to move between a nightclub setting, a suburban impound lot, an open highway, and a coastal airfield without needing to travel far between setups. That geographic compactness helped the production make efficient use of its months long shooting schedule, even as the sheer number of practical vehicle stunts required for the film's chase heavy structure meant that some sequences inevitably took longer to capture safely than a comparable number of dialogue driven scenes might have. The choice of Miami also gave the film a very different sense of scale and atmosphere from the first movie's Los Angeles setting, trading the industrial working class geography of LA's tuner scene for a setting defined by boats, beaches, and a much more overtly glamorous nightlife. A shift that the production used to visually signal that Brian O'Connor had entered a different kind of criminal world than the one he had left behind. The production's reliance on real drivable cars rather than purely digital vehicles also reflected the broader technological landscape of studio filmmaking in the early 2000s. While computer generated imagery was already well established for effects, work by 2003, high speed vehicle stunts of the kind this film depended on were still overwhelmingly achieved through practical means: real cars, real drivers, real ramps, and real controlled crashes, with digital effects reserved mainly for cleanup work, safety rig removal, and enhancing certain shots rather than generating entire vehicles or chases from scratch. That practical approach is part of why the technical advisors and stunt coordinators working alongside the main unit played such an outsized role in the production, since the credibility of the film's signature chase sequences depended almost entirely on how convincingly real drivers could execute maneuvers that needed to look spontaneous and dangerous on screen while still being safe enough to repeat across multiple takes. Post production editing on the film was handled by Bruce Cannon and Dallas Puett, whose job was to shape hours of chase footage, dialogue scenes, and stunt work into a tight, propulsive 108-minute feature. Given the genre's reliance on fast cutting and kinetic energy during racing sequences, the editing team had to balance clarity so audiences could follow who was where in a given chase against the desire to maintain a relentless sense of speed and motion throughout the film's biggest set pieces. That balancing act is one of the more understated craft challenges in this kind of filmmaking. A chase sequence that cuts too quickly can become visually incoherent, while one that lingers too long on wide shots can lose the sense of velocity that audiences expect from the genre. So, editors on action films of this scale typically work closely with the director and the second unit team throughout the shoot rather than waiting until all footage is in hand. Post production on a film like this one also required close coordination between the editors and the visual effects and sound teams to make the driving sequences feel as visceral as possible, since much of the appeal of the Fast and the Furious series rests on selling the impression of real speed and real danger, even when elaborate practical stunts and camera rigs are involved. Sound design, in particular, plays an outsized role in this genre since the roar of an engine, the screech of tires, and the impact of a crash all have to be layered and mixed to feel both realistic and larger than life. The finished cut needed to move from adrenaline driven action back into character based scenes without losing momentum, particularly given that the film's plot involves an undercover sting operation with several distinct phases, each of which needed to read clearly on screen. Even as the film cut between Brian and Roman's driving tests, their growing rapport with Veron, and the parallel efforts of Markham and Fuentes to keep the operation on track. Because the plot hinges on a fairly intricate double cross structure involving GPS tagged vehicles, a decoy operation staged by Tej and his crew, and Veron's own hidden awareness that he is under surveillance, the editing process also had to manage a good deal of narrative bookkeeping. Audiences needed enough information at each stage to follow the mechanics of the sting without the film spelling out every detail so explicitly that the eventual reveals lost their impact. A balance that action thrillers built around undercover operations frequently have to strike between clarity and suspense. The film's climactic sequence, which shifts between a decoy handoff at an airfield and the real confrontation playing out at a nearby marina, required particularly careful cross cutting so that the audience could track two simultaneous locations without becoming confused about which characters were where at any given moment. Post production scheduling for a summer tentpole release also came with a fixed, non negotiable deadline, since the film's June 2003 release date had already been set well before editing began. That kind of externally imposed timeline is standard for major studio releases tied to a specific summer corridor, but it does shape how much room editors and sound teams have to experiment with a cut before locking picture, meaning that many of the creative decisions made in the editing room needed to be finalized efficiently rather than through prolonged open ended revision. Music, the film's score, was composed by David Arnold, a composer whose work at that point in his career was already closely associated with big, propulsive orchestral scoring for large scale action and spy films. His job on Too Fast, Too Furious was to underline the story's tension between glossy Miami excess and high stakes criminal danger, providing a musical backbone for the chase sequences that could sit comfortably alongside the film's heavy use of contemporary hip hop and R&B on the soundtrack, blending traditional orchestral scoring techniques with a more contemporary rhythm driven sensibility suited to the film's youth oriented marketing. That soundtrack itself was released on May 27, 2003, just ahead of the film's theatrical debut through Def Jam Recordings, the same label that Ludacris was signed to at the time. The pairing made sense both commercially and thematically. Def Jam was one of the most prominent hip hop labels in the country, and putting its artists front and center on the soundtrack tied the film directly into the sound of contemporary Southern hip hop, a genre and regional scene that was rapidly gaining mainstream visibility in the early 2000s as artists from Atlanta and across the South began to reshape the broader hip hop landscape. Singleton himself later spoke about this choice as a deliberate departure from the electronic and techno leaning music that had defined the first film's soundtrack, explaining that he wanted the sequel's music to reflect Southern hip hop, which he described as the dominant sound of the moment, and that doing so helped make the film feel more multi ethnic and more attuned to the culture surrounding Miami's street racing scene specifically, rather than simply repeating the sonic choices of the original film. That musical shift also lined up neatly with the film's expanded cast of hip hop affiliated performers. Since having Ludacris in a prominent on screen role gave the soundtrack an obvious built in connection to the film's actual content rather than functioning as a separate marketing exercise layered on top of an unrelated movie. The soundtrack's release, just over a week before the film's theatrical debut, followed a fairly standard promotional pattern for major studio releases of the era, giving radio programmers and music video channels time to build familiarity with key tracks before audiences saw the film itself. Pairing a major studio action sequel with a Def Jam branded soundtrack also situated the film within a broader early 2000s trend of Hollywood studios courting hip hop audiences directly, both through soundtrack placement and through casting choices that brought established recording artists into meaningful on screen roles rather than confining them to brief cameos. For Def Jam, The association with a major theatrical release offered valuable crossover exposure beyond the label's traditional radio and retail channels. While for Universal, the partnership offered a direct line into exactly the demographic the studio was hoping would turn out in force for opening weekend. David Arnold's orchestral contributions, meanwhile, needed to do the less flashy but equally important work of scoring the film's quieter, dramatic beats and heightening tension during the undercover operation's most suspenseful stretches, providing a musical through line that could sit underneath the soundtrack's more prominent hip hop and R&B tracks without feeling like two entirely separate scoring approaches stitched together. Arnold's broader body of work at the time had made him a reliable choice for productions that needed a score capable of carrying large scale action without overwhelming a film's more character focused scenes. And that versatility suited a film like Too Fast, Too Furious, which needed music that could shift fluidly between high speed chase sequences, tense, undercover negotiations, and quieter character beats involving Brian, Roman, and Monica. Rather than dominating the film with a single, instantly identifiable musical theme in the way some action franchises rely on a signature motif. The score's function here was largely supportive, reinforcing the emotional stakes of individual scenes while leaving plenty of room for the soundtrack's hip hop and R&B tracks to carry the film's more overtly stylized music video influenced sequences, particularly its race scenes and nightclub setting. Relay's theatrical 2, Fast 2 Furious, had its premiere at the Universal Amphitheater in Los Angeles on June 3, 2003, an event that gathered together much of the cast and the film's producers ahead of the wide release. Just a few days later, functioning as both a celebration of the finished film and a promotional opportunity to generate press coverage heading into opening weekend. Prior to the premiere and in select theatrical engagements, audiences were shown a short film titled The Turbocharged Prelude for Too Fast, Too Furious, a piece that had also appeared on special edition home video releases of the original film. That short served a specific narrative function. It needed to explain, at least in broad strokes, how Brian O'Connor had gone from the events of the first film to his new life in Miami, effectively bridging the gap left by Dominic Toretto's absence from the story and giving the audience a canonical explanation for why the sequel's central duo looked so different from the first film's lineup, a strategy the franchise would continue to use in later years as it developed an increasingly elaborate connective mythology across its many installments and tie in shorts. Following the premiere, the film opened wide across the United States on June 6, 2003, distributed domestically by Universal Pictures, with United International Pictures handling the release internationally. The theatrical rollout placed Too Fast, Too Furious squarely in the middle of the summer blockbuster season, a period when major studios traditionally schedule their biggest action tentpoles and family films in direct competition with one another. And June in particular has long been treated by studios as one of the most valuable release windows of the calendar year, given how much discretionary entertainment spending tends to shift toward movie going once schools let out for summer break. Marketing for the film leaned heavily on the same elements that had made the first movie a hit with young audiences: fast, customized cars, an emphasis on the growing star power of Paul Walker, and a soundtrack driven promotional push built around Def Jam's roster of artists. Trailers and television spots for the film emphasized its Miami setting as a visual departure from the first film, showcasing the brighter color palette, boat and yacht sequences, and nightclub scenes that distinguished the sequel's atmosphere from the more industrial nighttime Los Angeles racing scenes audiences had seen in 2001. The presence of Tyrese Gibson and Ludacris in the marketing materials also allowed Universal to court fans of both actors' music careers directly, treating the film's release as something of a crossover event between the hip hop and R&B audience and the traditional action movie-going crowd. This combination of car culture, music industry crossover appeal, and a recognizable returning star in Paul Walker gave the studio multiple distinct hooks to use across different advertising channels in the lead up to the film's opening weekend. Home media, the film made its way to home viewers relatively quickly after its theatrical run, arriving on both DVD and VHS on September 30, 2003. The decision to still issue a VHS edition alongside the DVD reflected the transitional state of the home video market at that point in the early 2000s, when many households had adopted DVD players, but a meaningful segment of consumers, including video rental outlets that still stocked large tape libraries, relied on the older tape format for at least a few more years before DVD achieved full market dominance. As technology evolved over the following years, the film continued to be reissued in newer home media formats to match shifting consumer habits and viewing technology. It arrived on Blu ray on March 24, 2009, taking advantage of the format's growing dominance as high definition television sets became standard in American households and studios began systematically revisiting their back catalogs to offer sharper transfers of popular titles. Nearly a decade after that, the film was released again in 4K Ultra HD on October 2, 2018, part of a broader trend of studios revisiting popular franchise titles to give them a presentation suited to increasingly common 4K television displays. A re release that coincided with the Fast and Furious franchise's continued box office dominance and the resulting appetite among fans to revisit earlier, smaller scale entries in high definition formats that match the visual polish of the newer films. Beyond traditional home video formats, the film's reach extended into the mobile gaming space as well. In 2004, a mobile game based on Too Fast, Too Furious was released by Digital Bridges, reflecting how film studios in the mid 2000s were beginning to explore mobile phones as a secondary platform for extending a movie's brand and giving fans another way to engage with its world outside the theater or the living room. Even though mobile gaming technology at the time remained fairly limited compared to console or PC titles built around the same license. Each successive home media release also gave the film a fresh round of visibility with audiences who may have missed it in theaters or who wanted to revisit it as later entries in the franchise grew increasingly popular. The Blu ray edition arrived at a moment when the wider Fast and Furious franchise was still several years away from the massive global scale it would eventually reach, but the format upgrade allowed fans of the series to build out a more complete, higher quality home collection as new sequels continued to be released roughly every 2 years. By the time the 4K Ultra HD edition arrived in 2018, the franchise had grown enormously in scope, and back catalog reissues like this one served an additional function, introducing newer fans who may have started with one of the later, more elaborate installments to the earlier films that established the series' original characters, vehicles, and street racing milieu. Reception box office 2 Fast 2 Furious opened strongly at the North American box office, earning $52. 1 million during its opening weekend across 3,408 theaters. That figure was enough to place it first for the weekend, ahead of the animated Pixar release Finding Nemo, which had been dominating theaters in the weeks prior and was itself on its way to becoming one of the highest grossing animated films ever released up to that point. The opening also stood out on a historical basis. It ranked as the fourth highest June opening weekend up to that point, trailing only Batman Forever, Scooby Doo, and Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, placing the film in fairly rarefied company for a sequel that had lost its two most prominent stars from the original picture. The film's performance was also notable within the context of Universal's broader 2003 slate. It became one of three consecutive Universal releases that year to clear the $50 million mark in an opening weekend, joining Bruce Almighty and Hulk in that distinction. A run that reflected a particularly strong stretch for the studio's summer programming that year and underscored how effectively Universal had positioned itself across multiple genres, from broad comedy to comic book adaptation to street racing action within a single summer season. On a more individual level, the opening also surpassed the debut of Shaft to become the highest opening weekend for any John Singleton directed film, and it topped XX to become the biggest opening weekend for any film produced by Neil H. Moritz up to that point, giving both men a new career benchmark, even as critical reaction to the film itself remained mixed at best. The competitive dynamic with Finding Nemo shifted in the sequel's second weekend, when Too Fast, Too Furious earned $19.1 million dollars and fell behind the animated film at the box office, a fairly typical pattern for the genre, given that action films aimed at teenagers and young adults tend to front load their audience in the opening weekend, while family oriented animated films often hold up more steadily across successive weekends as word of mouth spreads among parents. Even so, the picture maintained a lengthy theatrical run, staying in release for 133 days and reaching a peak distribution of 3,418 theaters across the United States at its widest point. By the end of its domestic run, the film had accumulated $127.2 million dollars within the United States. Combined with an international gross of $109.2 million, dollars, the film's final worldwide total reached $236.4 million. dollars. Within the context of the full calendar year of 2003, that performance made Too Fast, Too Furious the 15th largest domestic release and the 16th largest worldwide release for the year, a solid, if not chart topping, result for a major summer sequel that had been produced on a $76 million dollars budget, more than three times the budget of its predecessor, reflecting the studio's greater confidence in and financial commitment to the property following the first film's success.